Hi, this is Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. Thanking you for checking out this series, this trauma and healing series brought to you by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative.
Let's take a look at the first of those two videos. Christian Jacobs is another Brother Be Well clinical advisor. He's a therapist, as Malik is here tonight. He did a quick, we call them selfie videos at Brother Be Well. It's just 2 or 3 minutes long, but he kind of gives us an overview of ACEs exposure. And then coming out of that, I want to ask everybody that question about how difficult was it to reach back, maybe touch with Dr. G and Malik. Do we have to be careful when we're not in the presence of a therapist, of a mental health professional? Is it healthy, and are we okay to reach that far back and kind of dig up some memories that maybe aren't ones that we want to necessarily remember? But let's take a look at Christian Jacobs' selfie videos, his Brother Be Well selfie video. Let's roll it, and we'll be back in a second.
Hello everyone, Christian Jacobs here, Brother Be Well Clinical Advisor. Today I'll be talking to you about a topic that really encompasses abuse, neglect, and mental health abuse and emotional abuse as we grow up and as we get older, which is called ACEs, and that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Adverse childhood experiences initially began through the Kaiser Foundation, where several studies were conducted to correlate the importance of early childhood experiences, traumatic experiences, and how those experiences impact individuals growing up as adults later on in life, and how that impacts their well-being in life. So basically, there's a few factors that ACEs looks at. ACEs really focus on physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. So these 3 areas are the main factors that the studies go into, and there's several different categories and questions that a professional will ask you. So right now, ACEs is being conducted by professionals, health professionals, in a healthcare setting. And usually when you first come to the doctor's office, there's a list of questions they may ask you that they can gauge and can assess for how many childhood experiences, adverse experiences you've had in life. So some other factors that come into play with adverse childhood experiences, this study also looks into neglect as well. So neglect, the components of neglect is really focused on physical and emotional abuse. So it really assesses to see how many experiences a child has had throughout their life from 0 to 5, those first 5 years, in terms of physical and emotional abuse. Another area that the study focuses on is household dysfunction. Household dysfunction is very prevalent in terms of how it can impact a child growing up in life. And the household dysfunction can look at several factors, right? Domestic violence, divorce, mental illness, substance abuse, incarceration. So these are some of the areas that the study focuses on to see how many experiences in the household a child has seen visually or secondary in terms of how it may impact their development growing up. So for example, maybe they experienced domestic violence at the age of 4 years old. And studies do show that even though a child may not be the first to experience that domestic violence, just by them witnessing it alone serves as the same type of trauma that someone could experience as that first person who was either abused physically or mentally. So all ACEs can eventually impact a child to where the outcomes could be negative. So, for example, the more experiences, the more adverse childhood experiences one has, the more likely or the more susceptible they are to certain areas, which could be, I can just name a few of them, a lack of physical activity. So, for example, the more exposure that a child may have to basically that physical and emotional neglect and abuse, the more likeliness they are to experience a lack of physical activity, which can lead to smoking, alcoholism, drug abuse, missed school and work. That's another one too. So some of the outcomes that have been proven is that most of these ACEs studies, most of the youth between the ages of 0 to 5 that had the highest number of ACEs missed more school. Also, depression and suicide ideations are another factor, risk factor that could be an outcome in terms of a youth having a high number of ACEs. Also, the physical issues as well, such as diabetes and STDs. So, as you can see, adverse childhood experiences can ultimately affect the overall being of a child, and as they get older, basically those adverse childhood experiences can affect them more and more as they get older. So be on the lookout for more of these mental health videos, and I'll be sure to come back to you with other things to share. And once again, I just want to encourage everyone to be healthy and be well, and take care and have a great day.
I see that video and I realize how much I miss that guy. That's Christian Jacobs. I haven't seen him in a while. He's talking about adverse childhood experiences. Before we get into some specifics with our panel about how easy it is to reach back and do that, and maybe Dr. G and Malik could touch on whether or not, to the extent to which rather that should be done without being in the presence or under the care of a mental health professional. Dr. G just mentioned to us that discrimination and neighborhood violence have been added to that list of adverse childhood experiences. So let me open up to the panel. Is there anybody in the panel? I remember, Andre, it was either you or it was your boss over at Hawk Institute. Somebody over there was talking about growing up in South Sac and experiencing violence as a matter of course. And so I just want to open it up to the panel, those two, discrimination and neighborhood violence. I can look at the brown and black faces on this panel, and I'm almost convinced that we all could say that discrimination has been an adverse childhood experience that we dealt with. Is everybody nodding on that? So Andre, I don't mean to add to your number one score, but you got two now, my brother. Black and brown people deal with ACE for sure. But what are your thoughts on that? I don't know how we can start. Dr. G, maybe you could start us out, because I posed this question about even talking about this when we're not under the care of a mental health professional. What are your thoughts about that? Something we need to be concerned about or not?
So I think if you're looking at this from a child's perspective and you're trying to do this as a caregiver with your child, absolutely be with your pediatrician, be with somebody who's licensed professional, because the child alone is going to have some things, some questions, and maybe you may or may not be equipped to have that conversation with your child. But the bottom line is that person in that room with you will be able to have that conversation with your child. Mm-hmm. I think as adults, when we're doing this as adults and we're trying to go way back in history, I really think it depends on the level of emotional intelligence, right? How self-aware are you? How self-managed can you be? And then what is your motivation after taking that screener to be in interpersonal relationships after that? So I would say if you're going to do the screener, it's great, but know that you may be re-traumatized. You may come up with some stuff that you're like, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. You may even look at the list and be like, I didn't even know that was a bad thing. That was something that when I took it, I was like, I didn't even know that was bad. Like, it was that pervasive and it was just that standard that I just like, well, I didn't know it was bad until I found out it was bad. Yeah. And then I think the other thing to just consider is that when we do this in other settings, it depends on the age, right? Like, I don't think we should be doing this in a school setting not because I don't think our teachers are equipped to do this work. I think our teachers are wonderful, but we already have enough labels for our kids, and we already have enough stuff going on that if they're not paying attention in class, it immediately goes to ADD instead of looking at what's going on in the house. And it could be trauma because prefrontal cortex is offline from all the trauma, and poor little guy or girl can't sit and focus. Yeah. But when we do it in prisons, I've seen it in prisons, and it's beautiful. It's magical. It's amazing to see people who are like, I'm here because I did something, but that something was really it really stemmed from my trauma. I wouldn't have gone out and committed this crime had I not had this going on at home, or had I not had a dad, a mom that was incarcerated. I wouldn't have done and traveled this path. And so when I see it done in that, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Wow. Malik, I'm going to appreciate you sharing that, Dr. G. Malik, I'll get to you in a second, but Dr. G, you mentioned in schools and being careful there. So I can't move on from that without touching base with our Hawk Institute folks who are in schools all the time doing that mentorship work. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Doing too much of this ACEs work. Maybe we'll start out with you, Jonathan. What are your thoughts about, based on what you know so far, doing this kind of work in schools?
Well, some of the kids, like pitching on what she was saying, some of the kids you might get to seeing some of the things going on at home. Some of them at home, that home might not be that home. That home might be a foster care, and what I see with a lot of kids, some of the experiences in foster care, and they're not getting the love and the maturity that they need in life. And as most people in foster care, some people just do foster care just for a check. Yeah. It's not there to teach the kid or have the kid grow or have them prosper from the things that they learned in life and why they are in foster care. Some of them just do it just to get a check. And then as soon as that kid turns 18, 19, and that parent is not getting a check no more for that kid is going out the household and they ain't taught them to do nothing. So now the kid is more living on survival. And some of the things they do in life is based on survival, based on the thing they kids growing up in foster care.
Yeah. Yeah, so true, so true. What about you, Isaiah? What are your thoughts about ACEs work, identification? I'm sure treatment, it wouldn't be a good environment, but what are your thoughts about even having the discussions in schools, in the school setting?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I mentioned before, you know, it's really just to help us as mentors, you know, relate to the kids. I think we should have the knowledge to, you know, direct them more to folks like, you know, Dr. G and Malik and folks that are mental health professionals that can assist them, but recognizing some of those things either through relation or just through hearing their stories, hearing them speak, I think is important for us as mentors to just be that first, you know, because when you're a kid, you know, when you're younger, you don't know everything and you don't know how to get the help that you might need. And as we've already mentioned, we don't even know that it's an issue. We don't even know that it could be a problem that we're going through. We just see it as normal, everyday kind of thing. So just being a tool and being there for the youth, you know, again, is I think our main mission. And this is one of the ways I think would be important for us to recognize.
Appreciate hearing it. Malik, before we take a look at this second video, I want to touch base with Malik. He's our marriage and family therapist on board tonight. Malik, what are your general thoughts about at what point should we engage with youth in the identification of ACEs? Dr. G, I was also really moved by you talking about people who are incarcerated. You used the word beautiful when you saw the work being done. Maybe it was me. I was actually triggered when I took that instrument the first time. And not only were there things that I hadn't even thought about were adverse, but for me, it was a little difficult. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. What do you think about the difficulty or not? I don't want to lead you in this because it's possible I'm the only one. If some of you guys are using the measure today, Andre, you said you took it. Let me ask Andre. Andre, was that easy for you to do? I know you were pampered. I don't mean to I know you only had that score of 1, but was it easy or difficult for you to look back? For me, it was quite difficult, and I don't think it was just the passage of time. Just reading those questions, I was like, oh, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. And I found a sense of relief. We mentioned incarceration, the question over whether one of my parents had been incarcerated or anyone in the home. I did not deal with that. So I remember thinking, oh, wow, thank God. But some of it went down and it reminded me, yeah, that happened. And then it took my mind right back to the specific abuse and abuses. And that wasn't cute, as they say. I remember I had to do a little walk and a little self-care to get myself back together. It was not the easiest thing to do. So, Malik, I'm wondering, you're right there in your office treating people. Do you think is it natural for it to be hard to reach back, or am I aberration in that regard based on your experience as a therapist?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a difficult thing to reach back. For one, it's very uncomfortable to think about your past experience that has caused you trauma. So even just looking back at it, it's not an easy situation at all. But just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not like very important to do. So I still, even though it's a difficult thing, I still always recommend it. And to get to the question a little bit from earlier to joining into this question, um, as far as actually having the conversation, do you need to be in front of a mental health therapist in order to have this conversation? I don't think you necessarily need to. It's definitely, I always recommend it. So once you have started the process of unpacking, I think it's good to go to a therapist to help and assist with that unpacking. But I don't think necessarily that a therapist is necessary to start that. You can do unpacking with people around you. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, something can come to mind off of what someone else says, and you're like, wait, I can relate to that too, because I do this, but not for the exact same reason, but for a similar reason. So I don't think that it's an issue at all. Like, and like to echo Dr. G a little bit, it's a lot has to do with what can you handle emotionally.
Yeah.
If you know that if I think about this experience from when I was 5 years old, I'm going to have an emotional breakdown, I'm not going to be able to do anything for the rest of the day, and it's going to shut me down, then maybe in that moment, digging back is not the best thing for you to do. But if someone is speaking and they're having a conversation, they're like, yeah, I get really upset when people don't respond to my full message. And I'm like, oh, what's up with that? Like, why are you getting upset about that? And they go to, well, I don't really know, but I do remember my mom, like I would talk to her and she would only like, she just act like she's not listening to me or she didn't care. And then like, now they have this experience that they're putting with that. So when this person doesn't respond to everything that in that message, they're upset with this person, but not understanding why. But having that conversation with someone else can help them think about, wait, my mom actually used to do that too. She would like, I would have talked to her about school all day long. And then she'd be like, okay, that's good. I'm happy. And then you ask her, you're like, wait, but I asked you 2 questions within this whole thing and now you didn't answer it. So now when someone else does that, it can trigger you. So it's good to like have those conversations, because even then triggers doesn't necessarily have to be, you don't have to respond to your triggers negatively in order for them to be there. So it's good to still have these conversations when you're not in front of a therapist so that you can notice like, wait, that's triggering. Why is that triggering? Okay, this makes sense. Maybe I'm not extremely upset and I'm not angry and lashing out but I might be happy that I've identified what this is. So it goes back to what you can handle.
Appreciate it, Malik. We're going to get into that second video in just a second, but I want to say to this group a couple things before we move on to the next segment. First of all, having a group of Black and brown men together as a part of this Brother Be Well platform is endlessly satisfying to me. I know everybody watching this video is going to be fed and edified by it, because it occurred to me it's easier for me to get into how difficult something is because I trust y'all and I love y'all. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this. The other thing I want to thank you for quickly, I've yet to do a production with Brother Be Well, and I'm content director, and not get an idea for another production. So already I can tell you, based on this conversation, we're going to do a whole separate conversation on triggers, because we're using that word a lot. And I don't think generally in the general population, one might not be aware of what those triggers can be and how they can affect you. And when you just said, Malik, if you're going to be emotionally shut down, we're going to do a whole session on triggers on the Brother Be Well platform. The other, I think, Jonathan, you mentioned foster care, and that's huge in Black and brown communities. And some foster care homes are better than others, as we all know. One of my best friends growing up was in a foster home, and I didn't know until he graduated from high school and left. His foster mother was that loving and that caring. I thought that was his biological mom. And so coming from the environment I was in, I envied, his name was Michael as well. I envied him. And then when he moved away, I found out he was a foster. I hate that term, foster kid. He was in a foster home, but that was just powerful. So we're going to do something else on foster care. So thank y'all for supporting the content generation efforts with Brother Be Well.